What if the most important decision of your life wasn't made in a boardroom, but on a rain-slicked pavement outside a greasy spoon diner? What if it wasn't a choice at all, but a simple, unthinking act of kindness? For Maya Reed, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt and despair, giving away her only umbrella to a shivering old stranger, was just another Tuesday. She thought she was just keeping an old man from catching a cold. She had no idea she was stepping into a meticulously crafted test, a final desperate search by a dying billionaire for a worthy soul. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how one small act of generosity ignited a war for a $10 billion empire. The rain didn't just fall, it assaulted the city. It hammered against the panoramic windows of the corner griddle, a diner that had seen better decades, its neon sign flickering like a dying heartbeat against the bruised twilight sky. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, sizzling grease, and the quiet desperation of people with nowhere else to be. For Maya Reed, this was the scent of her life. Every drip from the leaky ceiling vent, every clatter of a cheap ceramic plate was a note in the dreary symphony of her existence. At 24, she felt 40. The vibrant colors she once dreamed of putting on canvas as an art student had been bleached out, replaced by the monotonous beige of her waitress uniform and the grim gray of mounting medical bills. Her brother Liam was the sun her world orbited, and his light was fading. A rare degenerative lung disease was slowly stealing his breath, and each new experimental treatment cost more than Maya earned in a year. So she dropped out of the prestigious Rhode Island School of Design, traded her paintbrushes for a serving tray, and worked double shifts until her feet were numb, and her smile was a painful, practiced mask. "Order up for table 6, Maya barked. Sal the cook, whose temper was as short as his friar's oil life. Maya forced the mask on. "Got it, Sal," she chirped, her voice betraying a sliver of the exhaustion that clung to her bones like a shroud. She delivered the glistening cheeseburger and fries, collected a meager tip, and glanced at the clock. 10:58 p.m. 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes until she could begin the long, damp walk back to the tiny apartment she shared with Liam, where she would check his oxygen levels, administer his medication, and then collapse into a dreamless sleep before doing it all again. The bell above the door chimed a tinny, cheerful sound at odds with the storm. A man shuffled in, but he didn't come to the counter. He just stood by the entrance, a ghost dripping onto the linoleum. He was old, impossibly so, with a face like a crumpled road map of a long and difficult journey. His clothes, a threadbare tweed coat, and worn trousers were soaked through, clinging to a frame so thin he looked like he might be swept away by a strong gust of wind. He wasn't looking for a meal. He was just seeking a momentary reprieve from the deluge. Her shift ended. Maya grabbed her bag and her most prized possession, a large, sturdy black umbrella her father had given her before he passed away. It was old, but it was reliable. It was her shield against the world. As she pushed the door open, the wind tore at her. And there he was, the old man now back outside, huddled under the diner's meager awning. He shivered a violent, full-bodied tremor that seemed to shake his very soul. His eyes, pale and watery, met hers for a fleeting second. They held no plea, only a profound, bottomless weariness. Something inside Maya cracked. She saw her own exhaustion mirrored in him. She saw the world's indifference. She thought of Liam, of how fragile life was, of how a simple chill could turn into pneumonia for him. Her mind screamed at her. "You need that umbrella. The The walk is 20 minutes. You'll be soaked. You can't afford to get sick." But her heart, the stubborn, foolish muscle that had already cost her so much, had other ideas. She walked over to him. "Sir." He flinched, as if expecting to be told off. "Here," she said, holding out the umbrella. "You need this more than I do." The man stared at the umbrella, then at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "But it's yours. It's pouring." His voice was a dry, raspy whisper. "It's just water," Maya said, offering a genuine, tired smile. "I'll dry off. You look like you could use a break from it." She pushed the umbrella into his frail hands. His fingers, cold and bony, brushed against hers. For a moment he simply held it, looking at her with an intensity that was unnerving. It was as if he wasn't just seeing her, but looking straight through her, weighing and measuring something deep inside. "Thank you." He finally whispered the words, thick with an emotion she couldn't place. "What is your name?" "Maya," she replied, pulling her thin jacket tighter around herself. "Just Maya. Get home safe." She turned and plunged into the rain, not looking back. The icy needles of water hit her instantly, plastering her hair to her face and seeping into her clothes. It was cold, miserable, and she knew she'd regret it when she was shivering in her apartment. But as she walked, a strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't pity. It was a flicker of defiance. The world could take her dreams, her money, her energy. But it couldn't take that one small piece of her that refused to be as cold and hard as the pavement beneath her feet. She never saw the black Lincoln Town car that pulled up to the corner a minute later. She didn't see the old man, now sitting in the plush leather back seat, hand a wet umbrella to his driver. And she didn't hear his quiet, firm words to the man in the passenger seat. "David," the old man said, his voice now stripped of its feigned fragility, carrying an unmistakable authority. "Her name is Maya Reed. She works at the corner griddle. Find out everything there is to know about her. Everything." The man in the passenger seat, David Harrison, a man with the sharp suit and sharper eyes of a high-powered attorney, simply nodded. "Consider it done, Mr. Sterling." Alistair Sterling leaned back, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked window. For the first time in months, amidst the crushing weight of his diagnosis and the vulturous circling of his family, he felt a sliver of something he thought he'd lost forever hope. The test had begun. The next week was a blur of the same grueling routine. The memory of the old man in the rain faded, just another poignant but insignificant moment in a life full of them. The warmth she had felt was quickly extinguished by the cold reality of a final notice from the electric company and a call from Liam's doctor suggesting a new, prohibitively expensive medication. Despair was a familiar tide, and it was rising again. Then the letter arrived. It wasn't shoved in her mailbox with the junk mail and the bills. It was delivered by a courier, enclosed in a thick, cream-colored envelope made of paper so fine it felt like fabric. Her name, Miss Maya Reed, was written in elegant calligraphy. There was no return address, only a logo embossed in gold foil, a stylized S, intertwined with a lion. With trembling hands, she opened it. The letter inside was brief and bewildering. Dear Ms. Reed, you have been identified as a potential candidate for a unique employment opportunity. The position involves personal assistance and asset management for a private benefactor. The role demands absolute discretion, integrity, and a strong moral compass. The starting salary is $250,000 per annum, with a comprehensive benefits package that includes full medical coverage for you and your designated dependents. An initial interview has been scheduled for you this Friday at 10:00 a.m. at the address below. A car will be sent to your residence at 9:00 a.m. Sterling Enterprises 1. Sterling Plaza, 88th floor, New York. Read it 3 times. It had to be a mistake. A cruel, elaborate prank. Sterling Enterprises was a name whispered with a kind of reverence and fear in the financial world. It was a behemoth, an empire of real estate tech and private equity. And the salary. $250,000. That wasn't a salary. It was a lottery ticket. It was Liam's medication. It was a specialist in Switzerland. It was a chance for him to breathe. She thought of the old man. Could there be a connection? No, that was ridiculous. He was a homeless man, a drifter. This was a corporate titan. The two worlds couldn't possibly intersect. It had to be a clerical error. Someone with her name in a different, more deserving life was missing their letter. But what if it wasn't? The what if was a dangerous spark. For the first time in years, it wasn't a what if, tinged with fear. What if Liam gets worse? But one shimmering with possibility. On Friday morning, precisely at 9:00 a.m., a gleaming black sedan, the same model as the Lincoln she hadn't seen, purred to a stop outside her crumbling apartment building. The driver, a stoic man in a black suit, held the door open for her. Maya, wearing her only decent blouse and a pair of slacks she'd bought from a thrift store, felt like an imposter stepping into a chariot. Sterling Plaza was not a building. It was a monument to power. A spear of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. The lobby was a cavern of white marble and hushed importance, where people moved with the kind of effortless confidence that came from owning the world. The elevator ascended to the 88th floor with a silent, stomach-lurching speed. She was led into an office that was larger than her entire apartment. One wall was a solid pane of glass, offering a godlike view of the city below. The man who stood to greet her was the same man who had been in the passenger seat of Alistair's car. "Ms. Reed, I am David Harrison, Chief Counsel for Sterling Enterprises," he said, his voice calm and measured. He gestured to a leather chair. "Please have a seat." The interview was unlike any she could have imagined. Harrison didn't ask about her work experience or her education. He didn't seem to care that her resume consisted of a dropped art degree and 5 years of slinging hash. Instead, his questions were strangely personal, almost philosophical. "Ms. Reed, what is your opinion on legacy?" he asked, his eyes fixed on her, missing nothing. "Legacy," she stammered. I suppose it's what you leave behind that matters. Not money or buildings, but the effect you have on people." "And what of charity?" "It's essential," she said, thinking of the free clinic that had helped Liam in the early days. "But it should be about lifting people up, not just handing them things, giving them the tools to build their own lives." He presented her with a series of hypothetical scenarios. What would she do if an employee was caught stealing food to feed their family? How would she handle a public relations crisis involving an environmental accident at a subsidiary company? If she had to choose between a project that would generate immense profit but displace a low-income community and a less profitable project that would build a new community center, which would she advocate for, Maya? Answered honestly, drawing from her own hard-won empathy. She spoke of second chances, of corporate responsibility, of the human cost that never appeared on a balance sheet. She had no idea if these were the right answers, but they were her answers. She felt as though her very soul was being X-rayed. "One final scenario, Ms. Reed," Harrison said, leaning forward slightly. An elderly man, a stranger, is caught in a torrential downpour. He has no coat, no protection. You have a durable umbrella, a gift of sentimental value. You have a long walk home and risk getting ill yourself, which could impact your ability to care for a sick loved one. Do you give him the umbrella? The blood drained from Maya's face. The air in the room grew thin. It wasn't a hypothetical. It was her. I would give him the umbrella, she whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. Harrison's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. He leaned back in his chair. The position is yours, Ms. Reed, if you want it. Your benefactor prefers to remain anonymous for now. You will report directly to me. Your first task will be to manage a discretionary fund of $5 million, the Sterling Foundation's emergency relief grant. You will be responsible for reviewing applications and allocating funds to families in immediate crisis. Medical emergencies, housing insecurity, that sort of thing. Maya was speechless. $5 million. She, who had to count every penny for a carton of milk, was being handed control of a fortune. Why? She finally managed to ask. Why me? I have no qualifications, no experience in finance or philanthropy. David Harrison stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city sprawling below. My employer believes that the best person to understand the value of a life raft is someone who has spent their life treading water. He believes that true qualification isn't found on a resume, but in character. You passed the first test, Ms. Reed. Now, your real work begins. As Maya left the building, the contract signed, and her world turned upside down. She felt a dizzying mix of elation and terror. She had stepped through a door into a gilded watch, a world of unimaginable wealth and power. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched, that this incredible opportunity was just another far more complex test, and that the quiet old man from the diner was the one holding the key. The transition from the corner griddle to the 88th floor of Sterling Plaza was a violent culture shock. Maya traded the scent of fried onions for the subtle, expensive fragrance of leather and lemon oil. Her worn-out sneakers were replaced by sensible yet elegant flats she bought with her first advance, a transaction that made her feel sick with guilt and giddy with relief. Her new office was a minimalist suite of glass and brushed steel adjacent to David Harrison's. It was a sterile, beautiful space that felt more like a museum than a workplace. For the first week, she felt a paralyzing case of imposter syndrome. Every email she sent, every document she reviewed, was haunted by the fear that someone would tap her on the shoulder and say, "Sorry, there's been a terrible mistake. The diner is 2 blocks south." Her task, managing the emergency relief grant, was daunting. The $5 million sat in an account she controlled, a figure with so many zeros, it seemed abstract. But the applications that flooded her inbox were anything but. They were stories of raw human suffering, echoes of her own life. A single mother whose son needed a heart transplant. A family whose home had burned down, leaving them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. An elderly couple facing eviction because their pensions couldn't cover the rent hike. Each file was a punch to the gut. Initially, she was overwhelmed, wanting to approve every single one. But Harrison had been clear. Her job was to be both compassionate and discerning. To find the cases where the funds would not just be a bandage, but a fulcrum that could genuinely change the trajectory of a life. So Maya did what she knew best. She worked. She stayed late long after the rest of the floor had gone home, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. She didn't just read the applications, she investigated them. She made quiet, discreet calls. She cross-referenced stories, looked for inconsistencies, but mostly she looked for the spark of resilience, the same spark she nurtured in herself. She learned to read between the lines to see the hope hidden beneath the desperation. She approved a grant for the mother whose son needed a transplant, but also connected her with a foundation that provided long-term housing near the hospital. She denied a request from a man with a history of fraud, but sent him information for a non-profit that offered credit counseling and job placement. She was meticulous, empathetic, and scrupulously fair. Through it all, the identity of her benefactor remained a complete mystery. He was a ghost in the machine, a silent, all-seeing presence. She reported only to Harrison, who would nod gravely at her weekly summaries. "Your work is satisfactory, Ms. Reed," was the highest praise Harrison ever offered, but Maya learned to read the slight relaxing of his jaw as a roaring approval. One afternoon, Harrison handed her a new file thicker than the others. "A special project from our benefactor," he said. "Project Nightingale." Inside was a proposal for a new pediatric respiratory wing at New York General. The plans were ambitious, featuring state-of-the-art equipment, holistic patient care programs, and research facilities. The projected cost was $50 million. "Our benefactor is considering funding this," Harrison explained. "However, he has concerns about the hospital's administration and the chief of surgery, Dr. Alistair Croft. He wants you to do a full due diligence report. Go to the hospital. Be discreet. Speak to nurses, orderlies, patients' families. He wants to know what the money won't tell him. He wants to know if this project will be a monument to a doctor's ego or a genuine sanctuary for sick children." The name of the proposed wing sent a chill down her spine. The Liam Reed Center for Pediatric Care. It was a test. It had to be. They knew about her brother. The realization was both terrifying and touching. They had delved so deep into her life that they knew her greatest vulnerability, her greatest love. For the next 2 weeks, Maya lived and breathed New York General. She shed her corporate shell and became a ghost herself, a quiet observer in the hospital's bustling corridors. She bought coffee for exhausted nurses on their break, listening to their complaints about understaffing and bureaucratic red tape. She sat in waiting rooms talking to parents whose faces were etched with the same fear she saw in her own mirror every morning. She discovered that Dr. Croft was a brilliant surgeon, a genius in his field. But he was also a tyrant, a man known for his towering ego and his dismissal of any opinion but his own. The nurses spoke of him in hushed, fearful tones. He was a man who cared more about surgical success rates and published papers than the terrified child on his operating table. The project, she realized, would be a success on paper, but it would lack the one thing the children needed most: heart. Her report was 20 pages long, brutally honest, and meticulously documented. She recommended against the full $50 million grant. Instead, she proposed a smaller phased investment with the release of further funds, contingent on specific measurable changes in hospital administration, including mandatory patient empathy training for senior staff and the formation of a patient advocate review board. She was, in effect, holding the money hostage to force a change in culture. She was telling a billionaire his idea was flawed. She slid the report across Harrison's desk, convinced she was about to be fired. She had just criticized the pet project of a man who could buy and sell her entire world 1,000 times over. Harrison read the executive summary. his face an unreadable mask. He didn't speak for a full minute. The silence stretched thin and taut. "You do understand," he said finally, his voice low, "that you are advising us to attach conditions that Dr. Croft will almost certainly see as a personal insult." "I do," Maya said, her own voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "But the wing shouldn't be named after my brother if it's not a place I would feel safe leaving him. It has to be more than just new machines and fancy rooms. It has to be a place of healing. And that starts with how you treat people." Harrison stared at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of genuine warmth in his eyes. He picked up his phone. "Mr. Sterling," he said, "I have Ms. Reed's report on Project Nightingale." "Yes, sir. My thoughts exactly. Her recommendation is unconventional, but I believe it is unequivocally the correct course of action." He hung up and looked at Maya. "Our benefactor agrees with your assessment. He has instructed me to implement your proposal exactly as written. He also asks me to tell you that your perspective is your greatest asset." Walking out of his office, Maya finally understood. This job wasn't about managing money. It was about seeing if she could wield power without being corrupted by it. The ghost in the machine wasn't just testing her. He was teaching her. And she was beginning to feel that she didn't want to work for him. She wanted to meet him. Just as Maya began to feel a fragile sense of belonging in her new world, the serpent arrived. His name was Julian Sterling, and he was Alistair Sterling's grandnephew, the presumed and entitled heir to the Sterling Empire. He didn't walk into a room, he conquered it. Julian was everything Maya was not handsome, in a sharp, predatory way, dressed in a suit that cost more than her car, and radiating an aura of effortless privilege. He was the only blood relative Alistair had left, and he had spent his entire life waiting for the old man to die. He appeared at her office door one afternoon, without an appointment, leaning against the frame, with a practiced casualness that was more intimidating than any overt display of power. "So you're the mystery woman," he said, his smile a flash of white teeth that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "The one who has my uncle's lawyer wrapped around her little finger. Julian Sterling." He extended a hand, his grip firm and possessive. "Maya Reed," she replied, trying to keep her composure. She had heard whispers about Julian from the office staff tales of his lavish lifestyle, his ruthlessness in business, and his barely concealed impatience for his inheritance. Reed, I don't know the name," he mused, looking around her office as if it were a curious key at the zoo. "Tell me, Maya, what does a girl from wherever it is you're from do to so impress a man like David Harrison?" "My Uncle Alistair hasn't personally hired anyone in 20 years. The question hung in the air, thick with insinuation. "I manage the emergency relief grant for the foundation," Maya said, her voice cooler than she felt. "Ah, the charity slush fund. Cute," Julian sneered. "Giving my money away to the less fortunate. How noble." "Listen, Maya from the diner," he said, dropping the pretense of politeness and stepping closer, his voice a low threat. "I don't know what game you're playing, and I don't know what angle you're working, but let me make one thing crystal clear. That old man in the penthouse is my family. That company, this building, it's all my birthright. You are a temporary amusement, a nobody. Do not get in my way." The venom in his words was chilling, but it also ignited a spark of anger in Maya. She had fought too hard, worried too much, and cared too deeply to be dismissed as a nobody. "I was hired to do a job, Mr. Sterling," she said, meeting his gaze. I intend to do it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Julian's eyes narrowed. He was not used to being dismissed. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I see the appeal. Just remember who holds the leash in this little pet project of my uncle's." He winked a gesture that felt like a violation, and then he was gone. The encounter left Maya shaken. Julian was a direct threat, not just to her job, but to the very work she was doing. He saw the foundation as a waste, the people she helped as parasites. If he were in charge, everything she was building would be dismantled overnight. Julian began a campaign of subtle harassment. He would accidentally be copied on her confidential emails. He would appear in the cafeteria when she was eating lunch, making loud, pointed remarks about gold-digging secretaries. He tried to charm her, sending flowers to her office with suggestive notes, then turning cold and hostile when she had them thrown away. It was a classic abuser's tactic: destabilize, intimidate, and control. His real attack, however, was far more insidious. A few weeks later, Harrison called Maya into his office. His face was grim. On his desk was a file and a printout from a tabloid website known for its sleazy corporate gossip. The headline screamed, "Sterling heiress scam billionaire's new philanthropy guru has troubled past brother with questionable medical history." The article was a masterpiece of character assassination. It painted Maya as a cunning operator who had fabricated her brother's illness to win sympathy and swindle a position at Sterling Enterprises. It twisted her dropping out of art school into an act of academic failure, and her waitressing job into a sign of instability. It even included grainy photos of her walking into a free clinic with Liam years ago, spun to look like she was involved in some sort of medical fraud. The most damning part was a quote from a source close to the family, clearly Julian, saying, "We are very concerned that a vulnerable man is being taken advantage of by someone with a well-rehearsed sob story." Maya felt the floor drop out from under her. They had attacked Liam. They had taken the purest, most selfless thing in her life and twisted it into something ugly and deceitful. Tears of rage and humiliation stung her eyes. "This is all lies," she whispered. Her voice choked. "I know," Harrison said quietly. "Julian is behind this. He's trying to discredit you, to force our benefactor to cut you loose." "Will he?" Maya asked, the fear a cold knot in her stomach. "Your benefactor? Will he believe this?" Harrison looked at her, his expression a mixture of concern and something else. Resolve. "Our benefactor is not a man who is easily swayed by tabloid gossip. But an accusation like this, especially one involving the Foundation's funds and your brother's medical care, is poison. Julian has made a formal complaint demanding a full audit of the emergency relief grant and a review of your position. He is alleging conflicts of interest and potential embezzlement." The word hit her like a physical blow. Embezzlement. "He's trying to frame me," she said, the pieces clicking into place. Julian wasn't just trying to scare her off. He was trying to destroy her, to bury her in a scandal so deep she would never recover. "Yes," Harrison confirmed, "and we have to treat the allegation seriously. The audit will begin tomorrow. You will be placed on temporary leave, effective immediately. You are not to access your office or any company files." It was a nightmare. In one swift, vicious move, Julian had taken everything from her. Her job, her reputation, her ability to help Liam. She was locked out, silenced, and accused. The serpent had struck, and as she rode the elevator down her career and her future in ashes, Maya felt the crushing, terrifying reality of the world she had entered. She wasn't just fighting for a job anymore. She was fighting for her life. The suspension felt like a death sentence. Maya was cast out of the gleaming tower and thrown back into the grey reality of her life. But now, with the added weight of public shame and a terrifying accusation hanging over her head. The tabloid story had spread. Neighbors in her building looked at her with suspicion. Her phone buzzed with notifications from cruel strangers on the internet. She felt like a pariah. Worse, Liam had seen the article. He was devastated not for himself, but for her. "They're turning your kindness into a weapon against you, Maya," he'd said, his voice weak but full of a fury she rarely saw in him. "Don't let them win." His words became her mantra. She wouldn't let Julian Sterling win. He had underestimated her. He thought that by cutting her off from the company, he had rendered her powerless. But he was wrong. Her power had never come from the 88th floor. It came from the grit and resilience she'd learned on the streets below. She was locked out of her office, but she still had her mind. She spent 2 sleepless nights replaying every single grant she had approved, every file she had ever touched. Julian needed more than just a slanderous article. He needed evidence, something to make his accusation of embezzlement stick. He must have planted something. But what? And how? The answer, she realized, had to be in the numbers. He would have manipulated a financial record, created a transaction that looked like she was siphoning money. She needed access to the grant's financial ledger. But how Harrison had been firm. No contact with the company. Then she remembered something. During her due diligence on Project Nightingale, she had worked with a junior accountant in the hospital's finance department, a young woman named Clara, who was sharp, overworked, and deeply cynical about the hospital's administration. Maya had not only listened to her complaints, but had also anonymously submitted a recommendation to Harrison that Clara's efficiency and integrity be noted. Maya had helped her without wanting anything in return. It was a long shot, but it was the only one she had. She found Clara's personal email from an old exchange and sent a desperate, cryptic message. "Need your help. It's about Project Nightingale and fairness. Can you meet off the record?" They met at a hole-in-the-wall coffee shop miles from the hospital or Sterling Plaza. Clara was wary, but she came. Maya laid out the situation, not the full story of the inheritance test, but the accusation Julian had leveled against her. "He's trying to destroy the project, and me along with it," Maya explained. "He must have falsified a record in the Foundation's accounts. I can't access them. But the Foundation's grants are processed through a third-party payment system. The hospital would have a record of every dollar it received from the Sterling Foundation. I need to see the incoming transaction logs for the last 3 months." Clara hesitated. "This is my job, Maya." "I know," Maya said, her voice pleading. "But you know what's right. You saw how Dr. Croft runs things. Julian Sterling is 10 times worse. If he gets control, people like us don't stand a chance. All I'm asking for is a chance to prove the truth." Clara chewed on her lip, then gave a slow, determined nod. "Give me 24 hours. The next day, a simple password-protected file appeared in Maya's inbox. It was the hospital's ledger of all incoming Sterling Foundation donations. Maya spent hours poring over the data, cross-referencing every date and every amount with her own meticulous notes she'd kept in a personal journal. And then she found it. It was a single transaction for $50,000 dated 2 weeks prior. Her own records showed she had approved a $5,000 grant to the hospital's patient transport fund on that day. But the hospital's ledger, and undoubtedly the Foundation's, showed a $50,000 payment. The recipient account wasn't the usual hospital fund either. The routing numbers were slightly different. It was an account for a private medical supply company, a company that after a quick online search, Meyer discovered was a subsidiary of a shell corporation owned by Julian Sterling. The plan was diabolically simple. Julian had used his internal access to change the amount of her approved grant in the system from $5,000 to $50,000. The extra $45,000 was routed to his own company. On the books, it would look like Meyer had overpaid a grant and the money had vanished into a third-party vendor. It was the perfect evidence for his embezzlement claim. He had used her own signature on the initial smaller grant to authorize a much larger fraudulent one. But Julian had made one crucial mistake. He was arrogant. He assumed no one would ever look this closely. He assumed the Waitress was too stupid to unravel his sophisticated scheme. Meyer now held the proof, not just of her innocence, but of Julian's guilt. But what could she do? She was on the outside. She thought about sending it to Harrison, but she didn't know how deep Julian's influence ran. For a moment, she even considered leaking it to the press and fighting fire with fire. But that wasn't her way. That was Julian's way. Her benefactor, the anonymous ghost, had hired her for her character. This was the ultimate test of it. She had to face the serpent in his own garden. Armed with her evidence, she did the one thing no one would expect. She went back to Sterling Plaza. Her security pass was deactivated, but she didn't try to go to the 88th floor. She waited in the vast marble lobby. At 5:30 p.m., just as she knew he would. Julian Sterling strode towards the exit, laughing with a pair of sycophantic executives. "Julian," Meyer said, her voice clear and calm, cutting through the lobby's quiet hum. He stopped, his smile vanishing when he saw her. "Security," he snapped. "Get this woman out of my building." "Before you do," Meyer said, holding up her phone, which displayed the damning transaction log. "I think you should take a look at this. It's the ledger for your medical supply company. Quite an impressive profit margin you have siphoning money from a children's hospital fund." The color drained from Julian's face. The executives with him took a nervous step back. "I don't know what you're talking about," he blustered, but his eyes were locked on the phone. "Don't you?" Meyer pressed on her voice, growing stronger. "You thought I was stupid. You thought I was weak. You thought you could crush me. But people like you always make the same mistake. You're so busy looking down on everyone else that you never see the person right in front of you, the one who actually pays attention." She took a step closer. "You didn't just try to frame me. You stole from sick children. You tried to destroy a project meant to save lives. It's over." Julian stared at her, his mask of smug superiority finally shattering, revealing the panicked, entitled coward beneath. He lunged for her phone, but Meyer was too quick. "It's too late," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The evidence has already been sent. Not to the press, not even to the police. It's been sent to the one person whose opinion you actually care about." From across the lobby, two figures emerged from the private elevator. One was David Harrison. The other was an old man walking slowly with a cane, but with an unmistakable air of authority. He wasn't wearing a threadbare coat now. He was in an impeccably tailored suit. But his eyes, pale and intense, were the same. It was the man from the diner. It was Alistair Sterling, and he was looking right at his nephew with an expression of profound glacial disappointment. The air in the cavernous lobby crackled with a tension so thick it felt like a physical force. The usual hum of quiet efficiency ceased. People froze, sensing a seismic shift in the corporate firmament. Julian Sterling stood rooted to the marble floor, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. The ghost he had spent his life waiting to see in a casket was standing before him, very much alive, and looking at him with the cold fury of a betrayed king. Alistair Sterling didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet, raspy words carried more weight than any shout. "Julian, my office. Now!" He then turned his gaze to Maya. The intensity was still there, but the weariness had been replaced by something else, a deep, resonant respect. "Ms. Reed, please join us. I believe this conversation concerns you most of all." The ride up in Alistair's private elevator was silent and suffocating. Julian stared at his feet, a condemned man on his way to the gallows. Maya stood beside David Harrison, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was about to get the answers she had so desperately sought, but she was also afraid of them. Alistair's office. The penthouse made the 88th floor look like a waiting room. It was a sprawling space filled with old books, priceless art, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panorama of the entire city. It was the throne room of an emperor. Alistair settled heavily into a large leather armchair behind a massive oak desk. He gestured for Maya to sit, while Julian was left standing in the center of the room like a disobedient schoolboy. "For 30 years, Alistair began, his voice laced with a profound sadness. "I have watched you, Julian. I gave you every advantage. The best schools, a position in my company, a life of immense privilege. I did it hoping that somewhere beneath the entitlement, a spark of your grandmother's decency might exist. I was a fool." He gestured to a tablet on his desk, which displayed the evidence Maya had sent. To try and frame an innocent woman is despicable. But to do it by stealing money intended for sick children, there is a rot in your soul, Julian, that no amount of money can cure. "Uncle, I can explain." Julian stammered, his bravado completely gone. "She manipulated me, she—" "Be silent," Alistair commanded, and the word cut Julian off as effectively as a gag. "You will be stripped of your position at Sterling Enterprises. Your trust fund will be dissolved. You will be removed from my will effective immediately. David will see to the legalities. As for the matter of fraud, I will not involve the police. Not for your sake, but for the memory of my sister, your grandmother. She deserves better than to have her name dragged through the mud by your disgrace. Now get out of my sight." Julian looked as though he had been physically struck. The foundation of his entire world had just been obliterated. He shot Maya a look of pure, undiluted hatred before turning and slinking out of the room, a prince reduced to a pauper. The silence he left behind was heavy. Alistair Sterling sighed a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. He looked older now, more fragile, like the man Maya had first met in the rain. "I owe you an apology, Ms. Reed," he said softly, "and an explanation." He then told her everything. He spoke of his terminal diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, with less than a year to live. He spoke of his profound disillusionment with his family and the corporate world. He had built a world that seemed to reward greed and ruthlessness above all else. "I built an empire of things," he said, gesturing to the city below. "But I realized I had no one worthy of inheriting its soul. My legacy was destined to fall into the hands of a man like Julian. I couldn't allow that. So I decided to conduct a search, a quiet, unconventional search for an heir. Not an heir to my fortune, but a custodian of its potential." He explained the test. How he had spent weeks observing the city's forgotten corners, dressed as a man with nothing, looking for a single, unprompted act of human decency. "That night in the rain," he said, his eyes meeting hers, I had been standing out there for 2 hours. Dozens of people walked by. They averted their eyes. They pretended not to see me. You were the only one. You were tired, you were struggling, but you still performed an act of grace, expecting nothing in return. You gave away something you needed to a person you thought had less. That was the spark I was looking for. The job, the foundation, the impossible ethical dilemmas, Project Nightingale, even Julian's treachery, it had all been part of the test, a crucible designed to see if her character would bend under pressure, if her integrity would erode when faced with power and temptation. David, Alistair said, looking at his lawyer, thought I was a sentimental old fool. He argued that one act of kindness did not qualify someone to run a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. I was wrong, Harrison stated, his voice devoid of its usual stiffness, replaced by genuine sincerity. Your performance, Ms. Reed, particularly in the face of Mr. Sterling's recent activities, has been more than exemplary. It has been remarkable. Alistair leaned forward, his expression grave. Maya, I am not offering you a job. I am offering you my life's work. I want you to be my successor. I want to leave the controlling interest of Sterling Enterprises and the entirety of its foundation, a total endowment of over $10 billion to you. Maya felt the air leave her lungs. The number was incomprehensible. It was a weight so immense she felt it might physically crush her. She thought of her tiny apartment of counting change for Liam's prescriptions of the bone-deep weariness of her old life. The journey from there to here felt like a dream she was about to wake up from. Me, she whispered. Why, I'm not a businesswoman. I'm a waitress who got lucky. No, Alistair corrected her gently. You are not a businesswoman. You are a leader. You lead with empathy, with integrity, with a fierce devotion to what is right. That is 1,000 times more valuable than a business degree. I can't leave you my experience, but I can leave you my resources. I can't give you more time, but I can give you the power to shape the future. He paused, letting the magnitude of his offer settle. The choice, of course, is yours. It is a burden as much as it is a gift. But I believe you are the only person I have ever met who is strong enough to carry it. Maya looked from Alistair's hopeful, weary face to the sprawling city outside the window. It wasn't a collection of buildings anymore. It was a sea of stories, of struggles, of people just like her, treading water. And she was being offered not just a life raft, but an entire fleet. The test was over. The choice had just begun. The days that followed the revelation were a whirlwind of surreal conversations and existential vertigo. Maya met with teams of lawyers, wealth managers, and board members. They spoke of trusts, equity portfolios, and fiduciary responsibilities, a language from another planet. They saw her as the sterling heiress, a headline in waiting. But Maya felt like a ghost haunting a life that wasn't hers. The $10 billion offer was not a prize to be won. It was a cross to be borne. The weight of it was suffocating. How could she, Maya Reed, who still instinctively checked the price of coffee before ordering, be a responsible steward of such staggering wealth? Julian's parting glare haunted her, a reminder of the vipers that would forever circle her, waiting for her to fail. She retreated to the one place that felt real, her small apartment, with the familiar scent of old books and rubbing alcohol. She sat by Liam's bedside, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest, a rhythm that had dictated the pace of her life for so long. I can't do it, Liam, she confessed one evening, her voice barely a whisper. It's too much. These people, they live in a different world. They'll eat me alive. I should just take enough for your treatments and walk away. Liam, who had been listening quietly, turned his head on the pillow. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were clear and sharp. "When you were at RASD," he began, his voice soft, "you had that one professor, the one you hated, Professor Davies. The one who told you your work was technically proficient but emotionally vacant." Maya winced at the memory. "What about him? You didn't quit," Liam continued. "You spent the entire semester locked in your studio. You didn't just paint, you bled onto the canvas, your final project, that portrait of Dad. It was so full of life and pain and love that Davies cried during your critique. You didn't run from the challenge, Maya. You faced it. You proved him wrong by being more yourself, not less." He reached out and took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "This is the same thing. Alistair Sterling didn't choose a businesswoman. He chose you. The girl who shares her umbrella. The woman who fights for nurses and parents in a hospital boardroom. The sister who gives up her own dreams to help her brother breathe. Don't let their world change you, Maya. You go in there and change it." His words were a defibrillator to her heart. He was right. Her entire life had been a training ground for this. Her empathy wasn't a weakness, it was her superpower. Her experiences weren't a liability, they were her expertise. The next day she returned to Sterling Plaza, but she didn't go to the penthouse. She went to her old office on the 88th floor. She sat at her desk, the one where she had pored over the stories of families in crisis, and she began to write. She called a meeting with Alistair and David Harrison. She walked in, not as a terrified waitress, but as a woman who had made her choice. She placed a single sheet of paper on Alistair's desk. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice firm and clear. "I will accept your offer, but I will not be your successor, not in the way you imagine. I won't be sitting on corporate boards or playing the stock market. That will be David's job as the new CEO of Sterling Enterprises with a board I approve." Harrison looked stunned. Alistair simply raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "My role," Maya continued, "will be to run the Sterling Foundation, and I am not just going to run it. I am going to transform it. The entire $10 billion inheritance will be moved from a private trust into the foundation itself. It will no longer be a side project. It will be the company's entire reason for being." She laid out her vision. The Sterling Foundation would become the most aggressive, innovative, philanthropic organization on the planet. It wouldn't just be about cutting checks. It would be about systemic change. She outlined 3 core pillars. The Liam Reed Initiative for funding radical research into rare diseases. The Corner Griddle Fund for providing no-strings-attached grants and business mentorship to small community-focused entrepreneurs. And the Maya's Canvas Project for fully funding arts education in underserved schools across the country, ensuring no other dreamer had to give up their passion for lack of funds. "The profits from Sterling Enterprises will fuel this mission," she concluded. "We will still be profitable, but our profit will have a purpose beyond just making rich people richer. Our legacy won't be the height of our buildings. It will be the number of lives we lift." Alistair Sterling stared at her, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across his face. He began to laugh, a deep, genuine laugh that turned into a hacking cough, but even through it, his eyes shone with pure, unadulterated joy. "A custodian," he wheezed, looking at Harrison. "I told you I was looking for a custodian. She's not just going to protect the legacy, David. She's going to create a new one, a better one." The final chapter of Maya Reed's old life closed, and a new one began. She never moved into the penthouse. She bought a comfortable, modest house near a new specialized hospital for Liam. Her days were a whirlwind of meetings, but they were with scientists, teachers, and dreamers, not soulless executives. She was still tireless, still driven, but the exhaustion was gone, replaced by a boundless, electrifying sense of purpose. Sometimes late at night she would walk past the corner griddle. She would look at the flickering neon sign and the tired faces inside, and she would remember the girl she used to be. The girl who thought a small act of kindness was insignificant. She knew now that it was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. It was the seed from which an entire forest of hope was now growing, a legacy built not on money, but on the enduring power of a single shared umbrella in a storm. And so Maya Reid's story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured by the zeros in your bank account, but by the richness of your character. It shows that the smallest act of grace, offered without expectation, can echo through the world in ways we can never predict. Maya's life was changed, not by a lottery ticket, but by a choice to see another person struggle and offer them shelter, even if it meant walking through the rain herself. Her story is a powerful testament to the idea that integrity, empathy, and kindness are the most valuable assets any of us will ever possess. What would you have done on that rainy night? Let us know in the comments below. If this story of unexpected fortune and unwavering character moved you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will inspire and amaze you. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.